At Larson Auto Repair, the engines were always humming and wrenches always clanking. It was the busiest repair shop in all of Westfield, Ohio. Trucks, sports cars, and beat-up minivans came in day after day, each one needing something different. In the middle of it all was Earl Bennett, the janitor. Earl wasn't a mechanic, at least not officially. He was just the guy with the mop, older, quiet, and always wearing the same faded coveralls. Everyone called him Old Man Earl. He cleaned spills, took out the trash, scrubbed grease from the floor, and stayed out of the way. But there was something about him, something strange. He watched a lot. When the younger mechanics were elbows deep in an engine, Earl would stop sweeping and just observe. He didn't say much. He didn't laugh at jokes or get into shop talk. He simply stood there, staring at belts, pistons, and wires like he understood them. "Yo, Earl!" shouted Tony, one of the younger, cocky mechanics. "Don't strain your eyes trying to read the engine. Go clean the bathroom or something." Everyone laughed. Earl just gave a half-smile and returned to sweeping. Nobody respected Earl. They saw him as a guy who never made it in life, working a janitor's job in a grease-stained shop while others handled the real work. But then one day, Earl opened his mouth and everything changed. The Dodge Charger incident. One rainy Thursday, a bright red 2020 Dodge Charger rolled into the shop on a flatbed tow truck. The owner, none other than Mr. Delaney, the wealthiest man in town. Real estate, land deals, private jets, you name it. Everyone knew him, and no one wanted to make him angry. Delaney stormed into the shop with an attitude that matched the thunder outside. "This engine's knocking," he said firmly, "and I want it fixed, no excuses." He slapped a wad of $100 bills on the front counter. "Cash bonus for whoever gets it right. I want it perfect." The mechanics were all over it, Tony especially. He loved challenges, especially the kind that came with a cash bonus. They ran diagnostics, replaced sensors, checked timing, and rewrote engine code. Still, the knock wouldn't go away. Hours passed. The tension grew thick. Delaney stood with his arms crossed, growing angrier by the minute. "You guys don't know what you're doing," he snapped. Tony threw his wrench on the floor. "This doesn't make any sense. We've checked everything." Earl, quietly mopping near the garage door, looked up. "You hear that knock?" he said softly. "That ain't timing or ignition. Sounds like a worn crankshaft bearing." Everyone turned. Tony stared. "What?" Earl walked closer. "It's deep, low rev knock, like metal on metal. Oil probably starved the crankshaft." The room went dead silent for a moment, then burst out laughing. "You serious?" Tony scoffed. "Man, you clean toilets, don't talk engines." Another mechanic chuckled. "Next thing you know, Earl's going to tell us how to rebuild a transmission." Earl just shrugged and walked away. A suspicious discovery. That night, Frank Larson, the shop owner, couldn't shake what Earl had said. Just to be safe, he dropped the oil pan on the Charger. What he found shocked him. The crankshaft bearing was shredded. Earl had been dead right. Frank leaned on the workbench, hands shaking. None of his trained mechanics had caught it, and the janitor nailed it just by listening. He didn't tell the crew. Didn't want to embarrass them, or admit they'd been outperformed by someone they mocked every day. The public challenge. The next day, Earl walked past Tony, who was working on a Ford Mustang. "You might want to recheck the fuel rail pressure," Earl said casually. "She's running rich." Tony dropped his wrench and snapped. "That's it. You think you're so smart? Fine. Let's see what you got." He called over the rest of the team. Phones came out. Smirks filled the room. "All right, janitor," Tony said. "You think you know engines? Fix one right here, right now." He pointed to a 2002 Chevy Silverado in the back of the lot. The truck had been sitting for over a year, wouldn't start. No one could figure it out, and no one had bothered trying lately. "You get this junk running," Tony said, "and I'll never say another word. But if you fail, you stay in your lane." Earl looked at the truck. "Deal." Turning heads. A crowd formed around the Silverado. Earl popped the hood and asked for a few tools, socket set, voltmeter, and some starter fluid. Tony rolled his eyes but handed them over. Earl worked fast but calmly. He tested the battery dead, asked for a jump starter. Found the starter relay, corroded, cleaned it with a wire brush. Pulled the air filter, clogged, replaced it. Tapped the fuel pump. checked for fuel pressure, poured a bit of gas into the intake. The other guys were whispering now. How the hell does he even know where that is? Wait, is he actually going to pull this off? Earl climbed into the truck and turned the key. Nothing. He got out, adjusted some wiring, gave the fuel pump one last knock, and tried again. Click, click, vroom! The Silverado exploded to life. The engine purred. Exhaust hissed. Earl sat behind the wheel, calm as ever. The crowd went silent. Tony looked like he'd seen a ghost. Mr. Delaney, back to check on his Charger, stared, jaw wide open. Earl got out of the truck, wiped his hands, and said quietly, "She just needed to be listened to." The Silverado rumbled quietly, as if it had never been dead at all. Earl stepped away from the driver's seat, wiping his hands on an old rag. His expression was calm. No grin, no gloating, just a man who fixed something and moved on. But the garage wasn't calm. Tony stood frozen, speechless. Frank Larson took off his cap and ran a hand through his thinning hair. The younger mechanics exchanged stunned looks. The silence broke when Mr. Delaney, still holding his umbrella from outside, said, "Who is this guy?" That was the question no one could answer. Whispers and rumors. The next few days were awkward at Larson Auto. Nobody cracked jokes at Earl anymore. Some mechanics avoided eye contact altogether. Others watched him as he worked, not sure what to say. The mop in his hands was still the same, but suddenly it felt wrong, like a guitar in the hands of a concert pianist. Frank called Earl into his office that Friday morning. Earl stepped in, calm as ever, and sat across from him. "You're not just some janitor, are you?" Frank asked. Earl shrugged. "Didn't say I was." Frank leaned forward. "You knew what was wrong with Delaney's Charger just by listening. You brought a dead truck back to life. That's not beginner luck." Earl finally sighed and looked Frank in the eyes. "I used to be a mechanic years ago, back when shops still tuned cars by feel, not by laptop." Frank blinked. "Where?" "Detroit, 80s and 90s. I worked for Dodge, helped design engines, even had my name on a couple patents. Then life happened." Frank was stunned. "You designed engines?" "I was good at it, real good. But then my son got sick, cancer. Treatments weren't cheap. I left the job, sold the house, took care of him full time. After he passed, I didn't feel like going back to anything. Started drifting. Eventually landed here." Frank was quiet for a long time. "So why didn't you ever say anything?" Earl smiled sadly. Didn't seem like anyone cared to ask. Word gets out. By Monday, word had spread. One of the mechanics had recorded Earl fixing the Silverado and posted it online. Within a few days, the video had gone viral. Janitor stuns auto shop by reviving dead truck, racking up hundreds of thousands of views. Then came the phone calls. A local news station showed up to do a segment, then an Automotive YouTube channel, then a magazine. People started visiting the shop, hoping to meet the engine whisperer. Dugny, who once mocked Earl the loudest, now avoided him completely. The shame was written all over his face. Frank called another meeting. "I know this is unexpected," he began, "but I've made a decision. Earl's not going to be our janitor anymore." A long pause. "He's our new lead diagnostic tech. Anyone got a problem with that?" No one did. Earl stood beside Frank, still holding his mop. He looked around at the young men who once laughed at him. "Don't worry," he said softly. "I'm still happy to clean up when needed." A redemption ride. Earl didn't just diagnose engines, he understood them. Within weeks, Larson Auto became known for fixing problems that other shops couldn't figure out. Customers came from neighboring towns, even out of state. Earl never bragged, never boasted. He just listened to each engine like it was telling him a secret. And then he made it right. Tony eventually approached him during lunch break. "Hey," he said awkwardly, I was a jerk, I'm sorry." Earl smiled. "Takes a real man to say that. I've been wrong plenty in my life, too." Tony nodded. "Would you, teach me some of that old school stuff?" Earl chuckled. "Sure, as long as you're okay learning from a janitor." Tony grinned. Best damn janitor in America. Full circle. One rainy afternoon, nearly a year after the Silverado moment, Earl sat in the shop office sipping coffee when Frank walked in. "Got something for you," Frank said. He handed Earl a manila envelope. Inside was a letter and a check, $25,000. "What's this?" Earl asked. Frank smiled. "From Mr. Delaney. He said he's never had a car run that smooth in years. Called you a wizard with wrenches. Said the money's a thank you. No strings attached." Earl stared at the check. His hands shook slightly. Frank sat across from him. "Earl, I've seen a lot of guys in this business. None like you. You've given this place more than you know." Earl nodded slowly. "I never wanted attention," he said. "Just wanted to be useful again." Frank grinned. "Well, mission accomplished. Epilogue respect earned." Earl still came in early, still left late, still wore his coveralls and kept a rag in his back pocket. But now mechanics came to him with questions. Customers asked for him by name. He even got his own corner in the shop, his own tools, his own workbench, and above it all a plaque that read, "The Engine Whisperer, Earl Bennett." And on most days, after helping a young tech or solving a mystery engine problem, Earl could be found doing what he always did, quietly cleaning up the floor. Not because he had to, because he wanted to.